So I'm Ben Blandford from the University of Kentucky Transportation Center. I'm a PhD in geography, so my background is in geography. I do a lot of mapping, a lot of GIS modeling. So that's really, in terms of visualization, that's the focus of this presentation, is trying to visualize the changes in coal production and transportation. So I want to throw out a few background statistics on coal production. I initially did a paper for TRB in 2014, maybe. I don't remember exactly. A research paper looking at coal transportation. And we built a multimodal GIS model to model the movement of coal from origin to destination in the United States. And in 2010, we're talking 1.8 billion tons of coal. So it's no small potatoes here. In that time, since 2010 to last year, 2016, coal production has dropped significantly by nearly a third. So that by 2016, coal production is down to 728 short tons of coal. So this is very significant impacts to mining industry as well as to the transportation industry, which coal for railways and for waterways, coal is a very important commodity for business. Before I go on, I do a little aside here. I often do this when I present on this research. Coal has become a very politicized commodity in this country. Varying groups, political groups have seized on coal for its economic impacts, especially in historically impoverished areas like Appalachia and Kentucky. Other groups have seized on coal for its environmental degradation in terms of mountaintop removal. Also, emissions, CO2 emissions, pollutants. So I always feel like there's this sort of political elephant in the room whenever I talk about coal. So I want to at least acknowledge the elephant, but that's not really the focus of this presentation. I'm doing this more from an analytical, more of a freight transportation perspective. So just throw that out there. So I mentioned the previous research on this. I'll give you a little bit of background also. Okay, well, I couldn't remember the order of the slides here. So if you're not familiar with the geography of coal production in the U.S., each of these dots here represents a productive coal mine. This is from 2010, actually, when I first did the research. And the size of the dot roughly corresponds to the volume of coal that was produced from that mine. And I say roughly because out here, you see this one here in Wyoming. This is called the Powder River Valley Basin out here. If I were to make it truly proportional, that dot would cover up most of the western U.S., and it wouldn't be very useful visually. Just as a little perspective, majority of coal, or a large percentage of coal, is produced out here in Wyoming. But you see some of the other important areas here. This is the Northern Appalachian Basin. This is the Central Appalachian Basin, Southern Appalachian Basin, and this is called the Illinois Basin here, Illinois, Western Kentucky, and Southern Indiana. And then you have some other mines out here in New Mexico, Texas. They're not officially part of any basin, but they're also producing. So on the flip side of that, where is coal being consumed? These are all from 2010 again. Each triangle represents a coal burning plant in the U.S. And the size of the triangle is proportional to the amount of coal it received in 2010 and burned. These are for the plants that are part of the electric grid. So this doesn't include other industries, steel industries, or other industries that use coal. This is just coal for the electric grid. I don't think I had.
Yeah,
yes.
Estimate is from an electric grid perspective, they're the primary user, obviously, but what percentage of all coal that's produced would you say goes into the electrical business?
Well, I can say, I think in 2010 it was about 89%. But there's also about 89% goes to the electric grid, and then another, say, 7-8% is exported. And when I show the model results, I'll also have that exported coal in here, and I'll show some numbers on how much we're capturing in this model. I usually like to focus here. It's kind of hard to see from here. If you kind of follow this here, you see this density of triangles here. This is the Ohio River Valley. The Ohio River cuts right through some of these coal-producing basins, the Illinois Basin, the Central and the Northern Appalachian Basin. And historically, because of the proximity, because of the existence of the Ohio River, which means easy transport of coal, a lot of power plants have been set up along here. So this is kind of one of the major coal consumption corridors, if you will. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about this decline in production. So I wanted to look at the numbers for 2010, 2016, break it down, try to understand where these impacts in terms of just production, where are they being felt. So you see the three dark red states here. I don't remember from our presentation this morning, is red to blue. Is that, hopefully the dark red is easily visible. Wyoming, Kentucky, and West Virginia. So each of those, between 2010 and 2016, 40 million tons less produced in those states for 2016 versus 2010. So this is kind of the ground zero, if you will, for the decline. But you see other states as well in the -5 to -20 million here. Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Alabama, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia. A couple of outliers here. You can see Oklahoma, Louisiana, Maryland. They're on here as a blue, but it's really, in terms of percentage, it did go up a little bit, maybe 100,000 tons. From a percentage perspective, not very significant. But Illinois, on the other hand, did actually go up quite a bit. I have it graded as 1. I think they actually increased by about 9 million between 2010 and 2016. And also North Dakota has gone up quite a bit as well. I think it's more around 3 or 4 million. And the reason for that is about the cost of production of the coal, the cost of mining. Illinois, it's very cheap to mine because the coal is closest to the surface. It's easy to get to. Whereas in Kentucky, mining's been active in Kentucky since the 1800s. Much of the easy to get to coal has already been gotten to. So at this point, you have to remove layers of mountain in order to get to coal. It's a very expensive process to get there. And same with southern West Virginia as well. But the quality of the coal that comes out of these mountain areas is very high. So what you see is a lot of decline in coal produced there for the electric grid because it's too expensive. But you see a lot of coal being produced there that is exported for steel production, especially in other countries. So on the other side of that, again, this is consumption by state, the change between 2010 and 2016. You see the states that decline the most here: Indiana, Pennsylvania, Virginia. A lot of this has to do with power plants either been decommissioned or they've switched from coal to natural gas. You've probably heard about the shale gas boom and the shale oil boom. Well, up here in this area, gas was between 2010 and say 2015. The shale gas boom really made natural gas a viable alternative for these power plants, and many of them switched. On the other hand, you see a little bit in West Virginia going up a little bit and a little bit out here, but again, it's by comparison to the decrease, it's not as significant. Okay, so I've talked about the data, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the data. This data comes from the Energy Information Administration, EIA, Schedule 923. 923 accounts for all coal shipped in the United States that is destined to power the electric grid. So this data set includes origin by the actual mine, as well as the destination, the power plant. It includes the mode or modes of transportation used. It includes other factors as well in terms of sulfur content and things like that. But those are for this perspective, this presentation, that's what I was most interested in, were those. Also, another data set I used was for export, because I mentioned that export coal is about, I think it's around 6 or 7% of coal produced in the U.S. is destined for export. This data is not included in Schedule 923, so the data source is not as robust. But we do know where the coal is produced in terms of state and region, and we do know what ports it is destined for, where it is being exported through. So, talked to some of my engineering friends, came up with a linear I forget that I'm not an engineer, see, and my engineering terminology fails me. But it's an optimization model
Could be a
to.
programming model.
That's it. Yes, that's linear. I was saying linear referencing, but that's GIS. Linear program. Yes. It's an optimization model, and so you know where coal is being produced, you know how much is being produced, you know how much it costs to get to these varying ports, and then you run the optimization to solve the problem. So when you combine the two, the EIA 923 data with the export data, you come up with about 95% of all coal that's shipped in the United States. And that other 5% is for, steel industries and other private industries that are not required to be included on the Schedule 923. Okay, and a little bit of background on the model. We developed this model some years ago. It was part of a UTC program, which is University Transportation Center. We were really interested in developing a multimodal energy model that's GIS-based, where we could understand better the movement of energy commodities. And being a coal-producing state, coal seemed like a good place to start, and also because of the availability of the data through EIA. So the model accounts for roadways, railways, and waterways, and also intermodal points, and this includes ports, other types of intermodal facilities, coal tipples, and also rail switchyards. We talked about that earlier, about the difficulty of trying to model rail switchyards. The UK was active with University of Louisville in doing an inland waterway port survey on the Ohio River to try to understand which docks are actually being used for coal transfer, and it changes rapidly. So I did not update all that with 2016. That project is no longer going on. So the 2016 data is built on the 2010 model. So there are certainly some imperfections there. So we'll have to take that with a grain of salt. But I think overall you'll still see the value in modeling the changes. So I mentioned we have the EIA data has mode information in terms of railroad, river. So we already have that as a guide, but we ran the model separately as an optimization model, and we built costs into the model to try to understand if you're a coal mine in Wyoming and you're shipping to a power plant in Tennessee, say, what would be the most cost-effective way to get it there? And part of that has to do with the modal connections at the mine and the modal connections at the power plant, and also the business relationships. So we don't understand the full cost, but we can put in an order of magnitude where we say, because of the efficiency, waterway is by far the most cost-effective way, whereas rail would be the next, and then truck would be the most expensive. All right. So I'll go through some of the results of this. This is kind of messy. If I'd had more time, I would have cleaned this up better and made better visualization, which is, I guess, would have been important for this conference. But what we'll do is we'll kind of break it down. Okay, so this is just rail. So this is the change in coal volume between 2016 and 2010. Okay, just on rail. You see these dark red here. Showed you earlier how Wyoming production changed drastically over those years. And you see these dark red, these are like the two major arteries of rail transportation out of Powder River Valley, moving east, moving towards these major coal consumption. Yes?
I'm sorry. I just wondered, can you remind us what percentage approximately those kinds of numbers of millions of tons decrease amounted to?
How percentage of total coal on those? I didn't calculate that.
Or is that 50%? I just wonder.
I don't think it's 50%, and I would say it's probably greater than 10%, less than 50. I really don't have those numbers in front of me. And it depends too, because up here it's going to be, because so much coal is produced in Wyoming, the percentage will be smaller. Whereas down here, when you see this dark red, that's going to be a larger percentage. But I'll get to that in just a second here. Also, I should say Texas, in 2010, Texas was the largest consumer of coal in the United States. They burned more coal than any other state in 2010. But I believe Illinois was second. So you see these major declines here, especially eastward. Down here, across to Chicago, Some of that has to do with declining production there, and also because coal produced in Illinois has become more competitive, has become more cost effective. You see actually some blue segments showing up here, especially in the south right here, where you can see the impact of that increase in production in Illinois. This one is interesting to me, being, again, from Kentucky, where you see significant decline here going south into Georgia, going south into the Carolinas, and down to Florida. This corresponds directly with the major decline in production. Yes?
I'm sorry.
Sure.
Are you showing percent change from your network analysis, from your the optimized routing, or is it actual?
It's
is
okay.
It actual change, or is it from your model result?
It's from the model results, and it's not percent.
It's not percent. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's hard to see, isn't it? Yeah.
So what does that tell us? That based on your model, we will see the greatest change in the purple line?
In the dark red.
Dark.
Yeah, so the dark red lines are where the greatest declines have been experienced.
From your model?
Yes. And the model corresponds with the EIA data. The EIA data doesn't tell us which particular railway it's going on, but it does tell us where it's from, where it's going, and what road it is.
So the model tells which route they will take, what segment to take.
Yes.
I see.
So in other words, Ben, the model is giving a presentation of the flows of origin destination points based on your cost inputs.
Yeah.
So what's doing actually is...
Well, we did, for the 2010 data, we did do some data validation now because rail data is difficult to come by, as you probably know. And truck data even more difficult. At least with waterway data, we do have pretty good understanding of which waterway segments, how much coal is being moved on those. So we were able, for the 2010 data, to look at the data produced by the Army Corps of Engineers for the waterway segments and validate it. And we found that within a percentage of error, I think margin of error is, say 5 or 6%, I don't remember. But it was in the same realm. We're pretty happy with that. Given the fact that we know this much coal is being produced in Wyoming, we know where it's going, we know these are the two major supply lines, knowing, say, a power plant here in Illinois, oftentimes it will have a rail connection. That rail connection could be Union Pacific, it could be BNSF, right? Mm-hmm. So depending on who the supplier is to that power plant determines which line it comes out from Wyoming, because it costs a lot of money to switch from one major rail provider to another, if that helps explain that. Yes.
Given the nature of your model and your predictions, have you seen any interest from the railway companies in your forecasting volumes?
We're not really doing forecasting, we're really
It's backcasting, but
yes,
potentially helping them with planning their optimizing their routes and movements.
I would say the rail industries have pretty sophisticated internal data analysis where they know this stuff better than I do, at least for their own company. Now they may not know all, UP may not know BNSF as well. We're trying to aggregate them all.
Your advantage is in presenting the national picture.
Yes. That's why we focus at the national instead of at the local. One thing I did want to show here, and we'll come back to it again towards the end. If you see these blue lines here coming out of Pennsylvania and northern West Virginia going this way, these are going to the two major ports for export of coal are Baltimore and Norfolk. And in the case of Baltimore, coal exports actually went up between 2010 and 2016. Norfolk, it did go down, but it's still the largest. So what you're seeing is kind of a shift in coal production that even though overall decline in these regions, it's also shifting. So it's declining, moving southward, and it's also shifting eastward to these ports for export. I thought that was pretty interesting finding from this. Okay, the next one, this is waterways. We've got the Ohio River, the Mississippi River, the Great Lakes up here. Again, so the dark red represents, getting distinguished between the values. It's between 10 and 25 million decrease in volume of coal on these waterway segments. Given the importance of coal to the waterway industry, you can see that this is very significant for barge carriers. And the last one, trucks. I wanted to show this. The numbers are much smaller for trucks. They carry much less coal than rail or waterways, but at least show you where the activity is. And again, you see a lot of light red here where the volumes have gone down, and a couple in the Illinois area where it's gone to blue, where it's actually increased. Okay. You were talking about ports earlier, so I do have a slide on here on ports. I did want to show that the story I was talking earlier about Baltimore here. So in 2010, 13.9 million tons of coal moved through Baltimore. In 2016, it actually went up to 14.3 million. And you see coal there is primarily originating from Pennsylvania, northern West Virginia, and Ohio. Norfolk, it's the largest port for coal. 32 million, it dropped down to 23 million, so it's still the largest, but it declined by quite a bit. And it's mainly pulling from the central Appalachian Basin here, eastern Kentucky, and southern West Virginia and Virginia. Mobile, it declined from 9.7 million to 7 million, and they're largely pulling from the coal produced there in Alabama, sent down by either barge or by rail down to the port there. And then the last one here, New Orleans, it declined from 9.4 to 6 million. New Orleans, these are very, they're pulling locally. New Orleans is pulling much more across the United States because of the Mississippi River. The significance here is that Mississippi River, if you know the geography of the rail industry, you know there's two major carriers in the west, Union Pacific and BNSF. There's two major carriers in the east, Norfolk Southern and CSX. There's a couple others like Canadian National, Canadian Pacific, Kansas City Southern. But the dividing line between these is more or less right down the Mississippi River. And so anytime you're transferring a unit train from the west to the east, there's a significant cost that's incurred when you do that. This makes the Mississippi River even that much more attractive because the waterway industry can compete with these railways to say, hey, we can ship it for cheaper and more efficiently down the Mississippi to New Orleans and export it that way. So in that way, New Orleans becomes, and the Mississippi River becomes pretty significant for these exports out of the western basins. So overall, you can see exports dropped from 80.5 to 60.2 million. And I'm just showing the four largest ports. There's many others. These are the four largest. They account for roughly 80 to 85% of the total coal that's exported. Okay, so the reason I was interested in this, I wanted to see, I knew coal production had dropped. It's in the news certainly in my hometown all the time. They call it the war on coal. But also, unemployment is up great in eastern Kentucky. So I wanted to know how much it's going down and how is it impacting the transportation system and how is it uneven across the United States? What is the uneven geographic pattern of this so we can better understand what's actually going on? This model also helps indicate the impacts across the different transportation industries. So you can see its impact on rail, you can see its impact on trucking and barging as well. And being a geographer, data visualization for me is often in the form of maps. That's why I have a lot of maps here. So I believe maps are a very powerful tool for communicating this type of data, and certainly look to incorporate many of the thoughts our speaker this morning had on improving visualizations, because that's certainly something I could continue to do moving forward. So that's all I got. I guess I'll take some questions there if anybody has any more.
Okay, great, Ben. Yeah, definitely. Questions for Ben? I have a question about your points, your intermodal points. How did you develop that aspect of this model?
It was very labor intensive. I mentioned the port survey we did with the University of Louisville. That helped. There's also the Army Corps publishes a location of ports and docks all up and down the inland waterway system. That helps as well. In terms of tipples, the Kentucky does have a database for understanding tipples. Tipples are from truck to railroad generally. So we're able to get those for Kentucky, and then we would have students go through and just do, look at Google Images, and you know where the mines are. Let's find out where you can actually see them if you go through. If you look at the entire state of West Virginia, say, it might be hard to find them, but if you kind of know where you're looking, then it's easier to find them. So we actually had students go through and do that. That helped a lot. As far as the rail switch yards, some assumptions had to be made there, but we put Chicago, St. Louis, Memphis, these major locations up and down the Mississippi River where we know they're major rail hubs as the switch yards.